former Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Perrigo, Mike Jandernoa.
Good morning. Certainly, thank you all for coming this morning and joining us. The video sure shows the great support and enthusiasm that the business leaders for Michigan have for our state and for our future. But before I get started talking about my remarks this morning, I just want to recognize and thank our sponsors for this session. Charter One, and thank you, Sandy Pierce, who's also a BLM member. And also thanks to Crain's Detroit Business. We certainly appreciate your support. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Business Leaders for Michigan, we just formed 4 years ago. The Business Leaders is comprised of 80 Michigan's major job providers and universities that include, they provide 320,000 jobs in our state. They generate over $1 trillion of revenue. They power nearly 25% of the state's economy, and they serve over 135 students. And our members span from all sorts of industries, from construction to utilities to manufacturing and to finance. We are dedicated to making Michigan a top 10 state again for economic growth and for personal growth. Late in 2009, the business leaders unveiled the Michigan Turnaround Plan to transform Michigan's economy and make it a top 10 state for jobs, economic, and personal income growth. In January of 2012, we released an updated version of our plan. The MPT is a 6-step strategy to transform Michigan's economy that recognizes that there's no silver bullet that will make Michigan a top 10 state. We use it as a guide for our work and to hold ourselves accountable for the results. The plan positions Michigan for a long-term sustainable growth, and we do that through 5 steps. First, responsibly manage the finances by setting clear spending priorities, adopting sound fiscal practices, and by reducing debt. Second, effectively and efficiently, public service need to be provided, and we're looking at that in areas by reducing correction costs, increasing the local government's service sharing, improving the productivity of the state government, and in increasing the return on investment from K-12 spending. Third, creating a competitive business climate by reducing business costs to that of top 10 states, improving the responsiveness of our regulatory system, and in strengthening Michigan's workforce skills. Fourth, strategically invest in future growth by prioritizing the spending for higher education and infrastructure. Fifth, accelerate the economic growth of cities and metropolitan areas. As there are signs of the turnaround plan in Michigan, the 6th step is a strategy for growing the new Michigan economy by concentrating on inherent strengths and assets right within our state. Fortunately, our state elected a governor and a legislator willing to and wanting to tackle many of the tough issues we've been facing. In fact, thanks to their hard work, much of the steps in 1, 2, and 3 of our original turnaround plan have been addressed. They've fixed the basics and taken steps to make our state more competitive for jobs and for business investment. Now that our state's foundation is more solid, we believe that we can begin to address steps 4 and 5 by focusing on new revenue for higher education and infrastructure investments, and in adopting a holistic urban strategy such as we've outlined within our plan. We also recognize that implementing steps 1 through 5 isn't enough to make Michigan a top 10 state. That's why we laid out a 10-plus year plan for the vision of building the new Michigan economy. I know everyone here in the room cares deeply about the quality of our state, its communities, and families. As business leaders for Michigan, we do too. We live here, our families are here, and we are committed to this state. We're also committed to ensuring that our companies and thousands of small, medium, and large companies and the learning institutions that drive the Michigan economy will have a bright future. We're bullish on Michigan. We believe Michigan has turned the corner and is on a path to a bright future. In fact, that's a big part of what the business leaders from Michigan is here to talk about today. And we can all talk about how we help that recovery and help our state continue that growth path. We've tried to make getting involved with the business leaders from Michigan a little easier. And in your conference bags that were handed out in your room, you will have seen that you had a short list that Bill Ford was just talking about in terms of share it, talk it up, and drive it home. How many of you saw them in your, some of you got them? Carry them around, use them. We also want to take that another step to make it easy. You got your cell phones here, right? On your seats, right? We've got a card for you to pass out and just be able to connect right to the business leaders plan. You can show the video. You can share that video with family and friends. We've got to get engaged. We're making it easy for you to get engaged. So before you leave the island, how many of you are going to follow up and get tied in and get connected? All right, come on, get in. All right. That's a little bit more like it. We want to keep that momentum going, and we all have to be committed to our plan. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome President of the University of Michigan, Dr. Mary Sue Coleman, and Executive Chairman of the Board of Ford Motor Company, William Ford Jr., and Director of McKinsey & Company, Hans-Werner Kaas, and the business columnist and Associate Business Editor of the Detroit News, Daniel Howes.
Got too many chairs. Well, thank you all for being here. I think this is a very august panel, and Bill, you had give everybody something to think about. I'm very curious, though, as to how you talk about I have two questions. One is, how do you guard against complacency that I think is something people need to worry about? And second, you just laid out a case here to double down essentially in the auto industry and manufacturing in Michigan, and that has been the source of an awful lot of heartache and economic pain here. How do you get people to see beyond that?
Well, if I could take your second question first, then I'll circle back. Yeah, a lot of pain in the last 6-7 years, a lot of wealth created over 100 years. And but manufacturing today is very different than it was even 4 or 5 years ago. We are a lot less capital intensive than we used to be. Flexible manufacturing has ceased to just be a term, and it's now a reality. Mm-hmm. And I think that what killed us before was having such high fixed costs, and then having to drive capacity utilization to a point where true customer demand was almost an afterthought. Today's structure is very different. Our break-even point is, we said we're around we can make money in a 10 million unit industry. That's, depression level by historical standards. And that's true of not just Ford. This is true of our entire industrial base. Has really changed the structure of what it means to be manufacturers. And furthermore, as I said in my remarks, you look at the multiplier effect that manufacturing has on the rest of the economy. And if we get it right in this state, and I believe we will, that is a huge lever of growth for us, if as a state and as a local economy. So I think it's And the world is always going to have things. We're not going to all, we're not going to just need baristas. We got to make stuff, and nobody knows how to make stuff better than we do. Now, how do you go back to making sure we don't have slide back into complacency? There is no guarantee. But frankly, everybody in this room has to be part of the institutional memory that remembers how horrible it was the last 6 years, and just the pit in our stomach that we all had collectively, the lost nights of sleep. Nobody in this room wants to go back to that. And I think that is the only safeguard we have, is everybody in this room lived through it. Everybody in this room has seen what it's like to come out of it, and therefore it's up to everybody in this room to make sure we don't go back to that again.
You talk about the culture change, the venture capital culture change, and mention Stanford and Berkeley. And I'm wondering, as you're sitting there, President Coleman, listening to that, you see them as clearly your peer institutions. You wouldn't give them any quarter, I don't think, in anything. That said, what can Michigan do to help, as a university, develop the kind of culture that Bill is describing?
Sure, absolutely. Stanford and Berkeley are our peers in any way that we look at them. But what we don't have and are trying to develop, and I think what Bill refers to accurately, is this environment around those universities that is the entrepreneurial, risk-taking, failure's okay, we can do it, if we fail, we'll go on to the next business and the next business. And one of the things that we've been trying to do at the University of Michigan, with the help of a lot of people in this room, and the other universities in Michigan are doing the same thing, is to develop that sort of ecosystem that you have to have surrounding universities to make this all work and happen. And of course, we all look at Silicon Valley as being the model that we want to replicate. Silicon Valley was a long time coming. I mean, we understand all that, and we are in many ways in the infancy of doing this, but we have made a lot of progress. And if we look across the policies of the institutions, the way that faculty and students, for a matter of fact, can even do some experiments and start businesses and fail, and it's okay, I think we're going to get there. But we have to be willing to accept failure as okay.
But do you think the university plays a role here, or is it more about having a culture around it and essentially a business culture that can be supported by the business community, state governmental policy, the university's attitude towards these kinds of things? Is it all those things?
I think the universities are an important catalyst, because if you don't have the university participation, then it's really hard to get something going. So can't be the university alone, but the university, I believe, can lead the way, and then others can come in and see the success. And that's what I like about this sort of, many people understanding, getting involved, taking some bets, taking some risk, and we're beginning to see that happen.
Higher education funding has been a continuing issue. To what extent, but in California they're clearly stressed with higher ed funding. To what extent are the two related, do you think?
Well, I see so clearly the relationship between robust investment in higher education and economic development. I mean, I think we can look across history and see that these two are linked very closely. I also understand that we need voices other than the universities trying to make this case. I mean, we are now in Michigan back to the level, if you look at inflation, funding at 1964 levels. So higher education's really taken it on the chin during this economic downturn. I understand that the decisions were made, but now what we have to do is get back into the investment mode. And one of the things that's been so powerful in my participation in the Business Leaders of Michigan is the work that Hans-Werner has done in terms of providing the data, letting people see that Michigan universities are producing more STEM graduates than the national average. We're doing it more efficiently than the national average, that we are a good investment to drive this economic growth, and I'm hoping that we're beginning to see the turnaround. Now, it's our responsibility as universities to run as effectively and as efficiently as we can. So, we're not going to get a free pass here, and I don't want a free pass. I want to be held accountable, but I want to be held accountable in a way that drives us to always be looking at our peers around the country to get better. And I think we can do that.
Right. Hans-Werner, you're the number guy up here who knows all of this, has studied all of this. I'm curious, there's been a lot of cheerleading here in the last few days, and I think a lot of it, I would argue, is very legitimate in terms of progress. But as you sit here today, how does Michigan stack up? How much progress has it really made in the last 18 to 24 to 30 months as we've gone through the auto cycle and autos coming off the bottom and the political change?
Yeah. I think first of all, Daniel, it's important to understand the context. When you look back to the year 2000, Michigan has shrunk from a GDP standpoint 0.5 percentage points every year until 2008. So Michigan, in a certain way, was already in a recession before the official global recession in 08-09 was hitting us. Now, where do we stand today? If you look at the pure numbers, take the example of GDP per capita. We are around 33,000 today. That is roughly stacking up more or less in the middle. I think more important is what can we do? And if I go back to Mike's comments and the work Business Leaders of Michigan has done, with the 6 growth initiatives, we can become a top 10 state. Frankly, we could actually catapult our GDP per capita to around 45 to 56,000 per head 2020-22 timeframe, which really would put us in the top 10. Now, is that easy? Will it come easy? No, it will not. But with the plan we have outlined and mobility of the future, to which Bill was speaking to earlier in his remarks, plays a very critical role. I'll give you another example, engineering. Today, Michigan has the highest number of engineers per head. Our patent output per head is around 20% higher than the US national average. Question is, what do we do with those skills? We cannot just extrapolate it from the past. The technology mix and skill mix, and indeed what you educate at universities, to develop, for example, a hybrid technology or an electric vehicle, requires much more than obviously just quote-unquote the mechanical engineering. Software engineering is as important to get the right yield out of a battery or an electric power drain as putting the chemical engineering together to get the right yield out of the battery cells. That type of skill mix, I think, is very important. Now, where our strength is, I mentioned already the manufacturing, the engineering assets, but there are a few things which we will need to do more of. Entrepreneurship and the entrepreneurship climate, I would actually put at point 1 what we need to focus on, and that is a task for public sector, private sector, and universities. I'll give you a comparison. When you look at Massachusetts, probably for most of you well known, Massachusetts is always a good state to compare R&D competitiveness against. Their number of startups per R&D dollar spent is around 80% higher than Michigan today. Now, so we're a little bit lagging behind, you can say. I would actually portray it in a different way. It's the potential and the opportunity we have. Right. But we will need to test those things on and do it radically and very, very quickly.
But those numbers do not include, I would assume, the kinds of innovations that Bill's talking about that might be done by a General Motors or a Ford or a Chrysler, right? And so I'm wondering, as I listen to you, whether we have still too much of a historic, backward-looking definition of what manufacturing in the auto business really is. And you've been talking for years, Bill, about how one of the pitches to the young talent is that these are technology platforms, and they have been, and they're getting more and more and more. I mean, is there a way, or is there a need for you to continue to redefine what the industry actually is and what it does?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at, but I already see a sea change. When I used to go speak on college campuses 5-6 years ago, behind the investment banks and the tech world, I mean, we were, about the last person that they wanted to hear from. And they kind of, there's almost a condescending attitude towards the auto industry and manufacturing in general. Boy, has that changed. And it's changed for a couple reasons, not all positive. I mean, some of those other industries have struggled and had their own issues. But frankly, the young people today are working on problem solving. And so many of the problems that they're solving come back to industry and often to our industry, whether it's environmental problems, some of the mobility issues that I've talked about. There's really great work being done at the university level, a lot of it being done at University of Michigan, to advance these, and I think young people think that these are very cool things to work on at the university level, but also upon graduation, whether it's joining us or starting up their own business to attack this. And so I think there's been a really fundamental change in how industry in general, and I can speak to our industry, how we're viewed on campus. It's very different than it was a few years ago. And I think they do see I mentioned in my remarks of what an environmentalist used to be versus what it is today. Most young people don't even think of in those terms as being a quote environmentalist. They like to solve problems, and they don't really much care what those problems are. They have the tools now to do it, and that's what's different. And I think the universities in general are doing a really good job of highlighting issues that need to be worked on and giving students the tools to work on them. And as a result, I'm very encouraged by what I see going on university campuses.
The University Research Corridor released a report up here that said, among other things, I think it produces 3,600 auto-ready graduates a year. Do you see what Bill's talking about, a different attitude towards autos? I know we're in Michigan, so as opposed to some other state, but do you see that?
You know, I do, and I'm really happy that you're seeing it too, Bill, because one of the ways that it's so exciting to be a university president is that you are actually driven by the interest of the students. And what I've observed over the last 6-8 years is this sort of desire and really to go out and solve problems and do socially good things, but things that are going to be cool and interesting from a technology standpoint.
Right.
And what the autos have done, I mean, if you look at the auto today, and my grandchildren, we bought a Ford Flex. My son bought a Ford Flex for the grandchildren, and they couldn't get them out of the car because they loved all the gadgets in the car. And it's this kind of excitement about things that are happening today that the students really do want to be part of, and they want to be part of this problem solving, and they are fearless in a way about the future. And I think that is very good for all of us because, they don't expect that they're going to go to one company and have that job forever. They understand that they're going to have to continue to change because they see the technology changes in their own lives. And so that's exciting for Michigan because I think it is a huge potential. We are apparently number 4 in the number of patents produced, but if we are not transferring those patents into real businesses, well, it's sort of shame on us in one way,
right.
But hey, what a great opportunity. And we just got the first regional patent office in the country. In Detroit. That's a great big deal for us, and we should take advantage of that.
Right. Mike, as you know, the Michigan business scene is about more than the car business. The CEOs around the state, I think, are more energized and more engaged in policy issues, business issues than I've seen it in covering it since about the mid-90s. Why is that?
Well, I think when we started the Business Leaders Group 4 years ago, Hans and Patrick Anderson went through and did some analysis and looked at the last 30 years of what had happened in our state. And the graphs were overwhelming. As Hans mentioned, we were losing a half point of GDP each year, and it accumulates. And we hadn't been, in our own business, we're so focused, hadn't been noticing the big picture. And when that came to light, it energized all of us and said, hey, we got to step up and get involved and make a difference. And so the reason for getting together was laid out, and the idea of having a turnaround plan, a holistic plan, because there wasn't one that existed at the time, created a lot of energy for everybody in the room. And so that opportunity to say we can lay out a plan and we can identify ways to take us back to a top 10 state. We'd been there before. We had a great heritage in entrepreneurship and creativity and innovation, and we had kind of lost our way for a few years, and now the excitement to get back to those stages and the enthusiasm behind each of the members to make that happen has built clearly in a very positive way over the last 4 years.
What are the 3 things that you would point to drive the optimism that I think, at least I see and I think others see within the business leadership?
Well, clearly the first piece is having a plan that people have confidence in. I think people want to make an investment in an area where you've got confidence that the long-term visibility is going to be favorable to your organization. And we didn't have that before, so it was a little bit difficult to commit the kind of dollars that are required to grow our businesses. As Bill mentioned, there's a lot of growth and excitement in the manufacturing area right now. In the manufacturing business, we've got to kind of reinvest. And then when we reinvest, we want to reinvest that in a state where it's got the human resources and the talent, which is the other major piece that is so critical to making that investment. And with a plan and a state government that can support business again, that combination enables us to take the money out of our wallet and put it and invest it right here in our state.
Right. Hans-Werner, I'm curious about the, for the time in which Mike says we lost our way here, also happened to be a time when we spent a lot of time trying to use state policy to pick winners and losers, to diversify by identifying sectors and all of that. What I see with the Business Leaders for Michigan turnaround plan is kind of going back to the roots, which I think is also what Bill's talking about. Why is that going to be a more fruitful path to take?
I would paraphrase it, Daniel, in a different way. I think we would not go back to our roots. I think we are aware of our roots and leverage skills we have, and then move out into adjacent areas. And let me give you a couple of examples to illustrate that a little bit. When you take a look at the engineering, mechanical engineering, electromechanical engineering, but also automation skills we have, taught at the universities, applied in private sector situations and institutions, there is no reason why Michigan should not be able to actually build a significantly larger and stronger export-oriented machinery and tool and die industry. And I compare that with the example of Germany, not because it's my home country. I cannot come up with another best practice example. But let me explain why. A lot of the tool and dies and machines we use, in fact, in the manufacturing industry and also here in the auto industry, frankly, we import, or they're manufactured by companies who have actually opened their operations and their headquarters here in the US. There's no reason why US manufacturing skills and innovation skills should not be able to actually accomplish the same. And on another token, it would also allow to actually build our export business significantly. And at the end of the day, when you compete in a global market, we can only compete by expertise and by skill, and frankly by advantageous skills. And the machinery, tool and die industry, or production automation and control, is just one big example. I give you another one, engineering services. I spoke about the amount of engineers per head and that we are frankly leading the United States here. However, when you look at engineering services, Michigan only represents 5% of engineering services revenue on the national scale in the United States. That should be 10 or 15%. There's no reason how we translate that potential or should be able to translate that potential. And again, back to Mike, it requires a plan, which we are standing behind it. And I would say the other element, to pick up on that previous question, there is strong alignment behind that plan. It's not just the plan. There are 80 CEOs from Business Leaders of Michigan, and frankly, we have vetted the plan with many different institutions, associations, and stakeholders over the last, frankly, 12 months. We have also spoken with the governor about the plan. And I think we are very complementary what the state of Michigan and what the governor is actually trying to accomplish. That alignment across public, private sector, universities, education, and academic sector, this is what will make the difference.
Bill, I've got a question for you here. Somebody would like to know, Ford has not always embraced new ideas. How have you been able to change that mindset?
That's absolutely true. And I think it was part of our insular culture. We were an insular industry and an insular company, and we part of it was, it's interesting. I see Alan Gilmore sitting out here, and Alan, as many know, was hugely instrumental in our company's success over the years. But one of the things that we used to do with our financial system is that whichever product program adopted new technology had to pay for that entire new technology. And so everybody wanted to be the second and third program to adopt it. Nobody wanted to be the first. And so something that most people would never focus upon really was a great inhibitor to adopting new ideas. And yet that was ingrained in our company for many, many years. And we had no scarcity of great ideas. Our R&D area was very robust and coming up with tremendous stuff. But the individual program managers, there was no incentive for them to adopt that new technology. In fact, there was a disincentive for them to do it. And so we've changed that. I mean, that's just one example. Another example is that going through what we went through, we took a point of view. The very first day I interviewed Alan Mullally, I said to him, Alan, there's no point in us going through what we're going to have to go through in terms of horrific restructuring if there's no light at the end of the tunnel. And by that I mean the traditional way that auto companies have gotten through tough times is by slashing and burning product programs and R&D. And this time around, I don't want to do that. In fact, I think if we double down in this area, we can create a great advantage for us coming out of this, this hell that we're in. And but that required, so then we said, what do we want to be? Well, we wanted to be the leader in fuel economy. Well, that was so far from where we were that really it required us to do things very differently and adopt technologies very quickly that in the past we wouldn't have necessarily adopted. And a lot of it is we don't have, at a big company like ours, we don't have to have all the ideas. But what we have to do is to be very nimble and quick adopters of other people's technology. And so we're dealing with non-traditional suppliers now, like Microsoft and Google and people like that. And they operate in a real-time world. And we have to, and we are becoming quite good at it. We're not where we need to be. Operating along that same cadence with them.
Well, you're in the process, are you not, of opening an office in Silicon Valley to do just that?
Yeah, in fact, I was so excited that I went out and met our very first employee in the office. Because we haven't even had the official. I showed up, and this poor kid out of Stanford was walking around, and so. But
did he say, "Who are you"?
Yeah, I think he knew who I was, and I think he wasn't quite prepared for it. But it was a. But it was a blast because he had, he was exactly the kind of young person we were looking for. What was interesting, though, so why do we do it? Well, part of it is for us to keep abreast of what's going on out there. But I think a more important element is for all those people with great ideas to know where to go at Ford. I mean, if you're a young startup in Silicon Valley, and you might have great ideas. Dearborn, Michigan's a long way away, and you don't know who to talk to. You have no idea how to get your foot in the door. So a big part of what the Silicon Valley office is to allow young entrepreneurs to have access to us as a company, and for those people out there to act as conduits to bring them into us.
Mm-hmm. Mary, so you have a question from the audience. How will increased investment in Michigan, University of Michigan, directly benefit the youth of our state when increasingly it is much more difficult for those youth to get into U of M? The available spaces are increasingly being taken by international students who leave after graduation.
So that's a multifaceted question.
Yes, it is.
And I will certainly try to get at that. So let's talk about the increased investment. I mean, one of the things that's happened over the last decade, and it's been going on for 30 years, is that the burden of the cost of higher education has gone to families and less to the state and less to the society. And we can look at it as a sort of a hidden tax on families and students to go to all higher education, not just the University of Michigan. And I think this is not good for society. I think if we look back over history, we see that partnerships and investment in families providing access to higher education has been tremendously important for this country. And certainly after World War II, we saw the opening up of universities as the creator of the greatest wealth generator that this nation has ever seen. So I would make that argument as well. The second thing I would say is that Michigan has 15 great universities. It's not just the University of Michigan. So there's opportunity here everywhere. If you look at the University of Michigan, actually our in-state, out-of-state ratios have not increased very much over the years. It's about the same as it's been for the last decade, 2 decades in fact. So we are not increasing dramatically. Our international students at the undergraduate level are a fairly small percentage, and those are not changing either, though we have tremendous demand.
What is that around?
It's around 6%, something like 6-7% at the undergraduate level, so it's not very great. Now, what the business leaders from Michigan actually data indicate to us, which is very interesting, is that as a state, if you look at all 15 universities, we are underperforming in terms of our out-of-state student population. That is, we have capacity, and these students come paying the full freight. They actually add tremendously to the economy of the state of Michigan, so that we are actually a little bit unusual in that regard. And in fact, if we look at the higher education marketplace as a piece of the economy that's really important, Michigan universities can add significantly, and we should be recruiting more out-of-state students to come in and help us support these great universities. So, I mean, that's my answer to the question. And I encourage all students, work hard, do well, take hard courses, prepare yourself, but don't set your sights on a single university, regardless of what it is, because there are lots of good options in this state.
Well, there clearly are. There are lots of good options in a lot of places.
Yeah.
You've all talked about entrepreneurial culture, culture change. The governor talks about it. He'll probably talk about it when we're done here, about needing to change the culture. But I'm curious how the people here, and I like to go boom, boom, boom around, how you can affect or instill a more entrepreneurial culture in a state who, looking backward, was all about big. Big auto, big labor, big government, big, 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 big. I'll start with you, Mike.
Certainly, we have such a great opportunity to do that because of what we've been through the last 5 and 6 years. And the key factor that Bill had just talked about is thinking long-term. They were going into a downturn, they knew it. He thought long-term and said we have to invest in the research and development, and we need to do that so that we're coming out of it in a very powerful and well-positioned strategy. At the same time, as we're looking at that from an environmental and an entrepreneurial standpoint, we've got to be more willing to invest and accept failure. And that's been mentioned a couple times, but it's really important. Our culture in the past in the state of Michigan has not been to accept that failure. So if you're doing a startup, you're taking on not only the financial risk, but the image risk and reputational risk. We've got to change that because every new startup is not going to make it. But the more startups we do, the opportunities expand in a significant manner. So culturally, I think we've been making those changes, and people are more willing to invest, and we're creating more opportunities, as Mary Sue talks about from the university perspective, the URC, and so forth. There's significantly more opportunities today than there were 4 and 5 years ago to invest in that entrepreneurial space, and I think people are willing to do it.
Bill?
Yeah, I think I'd say a couple things. First is, if you think of back to my remarks, those of you who are awake, I mentioned all this new technology we're going to need for our industry, and it's going to be massive, and that's going to happen somewhere. Most of it won't happen within the big companies. It's going to happen with either non-traditional providers or startups, and we as big companies need to be, as I said, very nimble and early adopters of this. Now, there's a second element too, and that again comes back to a lot of the big corporations. There used to be an assumption, and frankly, I think within our human resource areas, there probably still is, that if a young person joined us, we were going to have them for life. And if they left, there was something wrong. I'm on the eBay board, which is out in the valley, and it's people come through, they get them, they have them for 3-4 years, they go off to start something, and we can't hold it against them as big companies. In fact, we ought to encourage that within our big companies. It's a new generation. And Mary Sue said, this next generation doesn't expect to have a career at one company for the rest of their lives. That was always the expectation before. And I think we as companies need to come to grips with that and encourage them, if they want to go out, to go out, and hopefully to stay within our sphere so that we can benefit from them going out and doing new things. That's going to require a change on our part.
Get our own house in order by changing our regulations that we have within the university. We're doing that, offering more entrepreneurial courses, opportunities, offering support, making connections across the state, among the universities, making connections with our entrepreneurial centers and activities, making connections with places like Ann Arbor Spark, MEDC, Prima Civitas, all these around the state. I mean, we need to be working together, not against each other, thinking regionally, all these things that the business business leaders have been promoting over and over and over again, these work, these help, and I can see us making progress.
Two comments on that, Daniel. I think one, we actually need to even go back even to the school education system. Entrepreneurship and the, let's say, inclination to take risk should be taught in high school already. And risk or failure is frankly an experience and not, let's say, a failure in itself. And that frankly has to do a lot how young people think about it. If we can be teaching that at home, also in the families, I think that would be a major, major advancement. Picking up on Bill's idea around encouraging young people to really go out and venture. I think the opportunity to allow venture capitalists to really fund ideas in the R&D and technology pipelines of medium-sized, large corporations and encourage spin-offs is a huge potential. Frankly, capital is not limited or constrained. It's normally the quality of the idea and how you want to convert the idea. That is the limit, and that's where we need to help.
Bill, I've got another question from the audience for you here. It says, regarding mobility, are there other automakers speaking about and driving solutions about mobility? If so, what can we do here in Michigan to be the leader and prevent others from leading those changes and advancement?
I mean, I think what I was talking about this morning, there are varying levels of awareness within our industry. It's always hard to speak for the industry because there's so many different voices, and some are, some I think are aware of this, some are not. But if you think about, where we're going with, one of the things I said is the new jobs are going to be needed for this. It's not just the technologists. We're going to have urban planning expertise. All the policies that come around with autonomous and semi-autonomous driving features. I mean, why shouldn't we develop all that right here? I mean, if we really are going to become the locus of the future of mobility, and I believe we should, yes, the technology is going to be a huge piece of it, but there are these other elements as well, and all the automakers are eventually going to have to come to grips with this notion that our world is going to look completely different. I mean, the whole idea that we're going to sell 2 cars in every garage for somebody living in Mumbai in 20 years is crazy. And so, or even New York City, or you name it, any place. So we need to rethink our entire business model and what it looks like, and why shouldn't that be rethought right here in Michigan? And it's not something that's unique to Ford. It's going to affect everybody who's even tangentially involved with our industry. And I believe that just by starting this dialogue and having the thought process, having the universities tuned into this is a huge start for us in this state.
It occurs to me as I think about, pull the lens back a little bit, are we at an inflection point in this state with what's happened with the autos, what's happened at the state level? The question is being called in the city of Detroit. We haven't really talked about that, but the financial issues have finally are coming to bear. Are we really kind of at an inflection point where we're moving away from the past and kind of into a new era for the state in terms of business leadership and an opportunity?
I think clearly we are at that inflection point, and it started in the past 12 and 18 months. And the momentum we see within the job growth and the momentum we see within our companies, the companies we have in the state are stronger, healthier than many of them have ever been. Mm-hmm. And so we're at a point where we are ready to take it to the next level, and not just take it to the next level on a national scale. I think that we've done such a great job within so many companies that we are very well positioned globally. And so when you've got that kind of opportunity and capital structure, we can make a significant impact. So, when we started 4 years ago, and we do a survey every quarter for how we view our business in Michigan and how we view our business nationally. And for 3.5 years, Michigan was always lower from an opportunity in a significant manner than the country or globally. In the last 2 quarters, it's been significantly reversed. We're much more optimistic in the state of Michigan than we are what we see nationally or globally. So we are at very much an inflection point that we can take it and move in a very strong and committed fashion.
Anyone else? Well, it seems to me there's a lot more alignment. I mean, a lot of the old battles that we used to fight on the sidelines up here at Mackinac and other places, there's a lot more commonality of interest, it seems to me, between autos and the non-autos, between higher ed and business. And there's a lot fewer turf wars. Do you see that?
You know, I really do, Daniel, and it's very interesting to me, and I have to say, I give great kudos to the business leaders of Michigan for getting a plan, getting data, getting evidence, so that when we look at this, it isn't just hopes and wishes. It's based on solid evidence for what we see the opportunities are, what we need to add to those opportunities. And I think that this notion of being regional, thinking of ourselves as a whole state, understanding that nobody can be successful alone, that we've got to do this in partnership, I see it really, and I agree with you, Mike, for the first time in the 10 years that I've been in Michigan, there is a real change. Do we have problems? Yes.
Sure.
And do we have challenges, and could we slide back into complacency? But for some reason, I don't think it's going to happen, because I think the abyss was too great, and we were too, we were on the edge, and we're going to all remember that at least as long as we're alive. So I do feel it's a real different environment.
Oh, my sense is that we have a whole generation of leadership. I don't care if it's at autos, non-autos, who are not as moored to the past and the old fights of the past, and most importantly, the old excuses of the past about why things couldn't get done. It was a city problem, it was a suburb problem, it was the union problem, it was management, it was all these issues. And I sense we have a lot of people that just want to push forward and get things done. Do you see that in your membership?
Absolutely, and it's clearly the key is that having a holistic plan. And I am so proud of the members, the attendance, the energy that they bring to the meetings. And when we come into the meeting at the whole, we leave a little bit of our own company's benefits to the side and say what's good for the entire group. So many members and pushing policies, they aren't the best policies for their business, but they view they're the best policies for the state and all the businesses within the state. So in seeing that time after time, I think we've moved to a whole nother level of engagement and involvement, and I am very, very optimistic about the impact we can have. We are going to make a real difference here in this state.
That's a great note to end on, right at zero. Thanks very much to the panelists.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President and Chief Executive Officer of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, Daniel J. Lepp.
Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to make a great introduction today, but before I start, I want to recognize having been an alumnus of doing this event. Nancy, to you, congratulations. What a terrific job you've done. We were here a year ago on this very stage, hopeful. There were good things happening. We were nervous. I think as you flip a year later and today, one word comes to mind to me, and that's momentum. We started this conference, and I think of Angel Gambino and her talking about what her investment in Corktown and what she's doing and what's going on in Corktown. And all through this conference, it's momentum after momentum, whether it's in the auto business, the startup business, whether it's in West Michigan, whether it's in Southeast Michigan. And yes, even in Detroit, there's momentum. This Tuesday, we will complete our move downtown, and there'll be 6,300 Blue Cross employees in downtown Detroit. Joining our other partners in the downtown area, and just as an anecdotal, and I think this is like the coolest thing I've heard in a year, it is now impossible to get a leased parking space in downtown Detroit. And that means more and more people are working in downtown Detroit. And I think as you think about that and that word momentum, a huge amount of that credit is deserved by the person I'm about to introduce, Governor Rick Snyder. You think about it and you think about statistics and metrics. Our unemployment rate is about to drop below 8%, and when you think about that, that's phenomenal. The income level of Michiganders has gone up, and that's phenomenal. You look in any sector, the excitement about what's going on and really the momentum that's going to drive us into the future is really, there's a buzz, and the energy level in this conference and the energy level in Michigan is quite amazing. And I think the energy level of this governor is amazing, and he's done just a terrific job. And again, I said it last year, and I'll say it again today. The governor says what he's going to do, and he does it. And as a business person, you like certainty. And the one thing you get out of Governor Rick Snyder beyond all the other things he's done is certainty. When he says he's going to do something, he does it. So momentum to me is the word of the day. And so we're going to hear now from the governor of the great state of Michigan, Governor Rick Snyder.